All right, History 101 students, let's talk about Chapter 6. The name of this chapter is From Tribal to Universal Religion. So we are going to be looking at two tribal religions, religions that have limited appeal, except for people who were born into very particular circumstances. And so those religions that we'll be looking at are early Hinduism and also Judaism, and then how those religions change over time and become universal, more appealing religions in the form of Buddhism in the case of early Hinduism, and also Christianity in the case of Judaism. And as Judaism and Hinduism are still around, so they continue to go as well. But there's these interesting changes to make Christianity more appealing and Buddhism more appealing to a wider group of people. So I think that the material this week is really, really cool. I also think that some of the historical skills are kind of tricky. So I'm going to lay out what Riley wants you to look for, and then kind of what I want you to look for. And one of the things that Riley is really focused on is detecting change in the documents. How does early Hinduism differ from later Hinduism? And how do those concepts, some of them make them into Buddhism and some of them don't? And I actually think that's probably a pretty good way to think about it. That's not that hard. And then he does the same thing with Christianity. What is the Christianity, or what is the Judaism of the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus look like? And what happens in there in the book of Daniel? And then what happens in Matthew as we get into the New Testament? And as we get further into the New Testament with Paul, how do you see those changes go through? So it's pretty interesting stuff. So one of the things that you want to do as you're taking your notes is just kind of marking the different changes you see. Now let me go through this a little bit, document by document, but I'm not going to do it a lot. In document number 1, really what you want to do with that one is just get a sense of what is the feel for the kind of Hinduism being advocated in the Upanishads compared to what we looked at a couple of weeks ago. So refresh your memory on some of those older documents and take a look at that stuff in the Upanishads. And what seems to be the core? What are you being asked to do, or what is the reader being asked to do? The second document is one of the more famous stories of Buddha, and it is just his discovery. And so the short version is, what did he discover? He claims to have discovered something. And what is it? And in some ways, Buddhism in a nutshell is in that particular document. And then, of course, the next question would be, how would Buddha's discovery in document 2 be more appealing to a wider number of people than what you see in document number 1? I got to move around here a little bit. All right. And then document number 3 takes a look at how the Buddhists approach the caste system. So that's simple enough. What's happening there? What's happening in that discussion with the Buddha and the Brahmin? And what is their position on how the caste system works? And how do you think that plays out with Hinduism, which is really based on the caste position? And then fourth, we've got this piece from the Lotus Sutra. And the Lotus Sutra, it might be a little out there for some of you. Give it a read. It's an important sutra, and it changes the dynamic. And really the intention of the Lotus Sutra being included here is to introduce a transformation that happens in Buddhism to what's known as Mahayana Buddhism. And so, just as Theravada Buddhism becomes more appealing to a wider number of people than Hinduism, Mahayana Buddhism becomes even more appealing. And do you see any evidence for that in there? And just enjoy the reading. It's that stuff's kind of flowery and cosmic. Some of you guys will get into it, some of you won't. That's fine. But the Mahayana stuff can be a little tricky. Now, one of the things that I want to throw in, though, as we're doing this, is one document out of chapter 7, and that is document number 4, Buddhism in China, Disposition of Error. So basically what that is it is some guidelines for Buddhist missionaries in China about how to convert the Chinese, because the Chinese have got suspicions about Buddhism, and there's certain things about Buddhism they don't care for. So what is it that the Chinese aren't crazy about in terms of Buddhism? And how do the Buddhist missionaries disarm them to let them know that these concerns are, they're not what you think they are? All right. So if you can do all that, you can get some kind of timeline, not necessarily a timeline, but you can get some kind of an idea, some kind of overarching theme of the transformation from early Hinduism to later Hinduism to early Buddhism to later Buddhism. And then you'll get some kind of idea about like how religions change over time. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing with Christianity, except it's a little bit different with Judaism and Christianity in the sense that, well, one, supposedly we know more about that than we do Buddhism. So sometimes working with stuff we know more about is actually a little bit harder, because sometimes we kind of have our own preconceived notions of it, and then here comes some new stuff. So I'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing that makes dealing with Christianity difficult sometimes in Judaism is they have a very different sense of time than what we're looking at in the Hindu materials. You will not find dates in the Hindu or the Buddhist materials. They are not worried about that. You will find it in the Christianity stuff, and as you'll read through some of the introductions, some of the dates are questionable. Speaking of the introductions, this is a chapter where you probably want to read Riley's introduction to each document fairly carefully. There's a lot in there. So let's talk for just a second about some of the other documents. Document 5, Judaism in the Bible. Really looking at the type of Judaism that's being presented to us in Genesis with the creation stories. Also looking at some of the laws that are getting laid down through the Ten Commandments, and also some of the laws through the book of Leviticus. And there is also some ideas in terms of some of the Psalms that are, being sung, and some of the praises. So what can you figure out about early Judaism based on that document? And I know this might be a little bit of a trick for y'all, that I want you to think about how can you use this material as a primary source. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Bible is history, but it is historical. And so I think that we should take a look at it and see what we can figure out about that world with that primary source. And then, of course, we got to cross-reference it with other things. The next document, document 6, really starts looking at prophecies and apocalypse. And the book of Daniel is utilized in that. And there's some very interesting stuff in the setup for that document, in which Riley's letting you know this is kind of what was going on when it was written. And that's important. So pay attention to that stuff. And then we got this piece by Matthew, document number 7. So now we're getting into the New Testament. We're getting into the period of Jesus, right? So what seems to change with Judaism, keeping in mind that Jesus is a Jew, right? Everybody he knows is a Jew. All his followers are Jews. It's Jew. It's a form of Judaism. that you're reading about in that early New Testament, but later on it transforms into something different. And then we've got these letters from Paul. And one way to think about the letters from Paul is what kind of issues is that early Christian church facing that he needs to address in order to get more converts? All right, what kind of things do people's like, well, it sounds okay, but here's this thing that I'm not crazy about. So it's not entirely unlike that the Chinese having questions about Buddhism. So Paul's attempting to answer some questions. And then the final thing that I want you to check out is again in chapter 7, and it is that one document, document 2, the life of Constantine. And that is the story of Constantine. And Constantine is important because typically Constantine is credited for being the one who really institutionalizes Christianity in the Roman Empire. It takes off, right? That's when it really takes off. So what's up with that? And what is that? What's Constantine's story? And I think that if you can, come to class having some grounding in these ideas, we will have a ton to talk about. So that's all you got from me for right now. I will see you around campus.